Fairmont Crest has always liked to think of itself as the place where cracks are hidden under marble, where ugly stories are tied up with satin bows and stored in the cold cellars below, where a single glance across the surface shows a perfect portrait reflected back of an elite community. But the day the woman appeared at the gate with a child in her arms, every layer of veneer began to split. The first fracture wasn't in the stone courtyard or the wrought iron fence, but in Dani's eyes. Eyes that once believed she knew Andre better than anyone, now shattering before a truth as sharp as a blade. There was another life of his, one that didn't belong to her, didn't belong to those afternoons when they sat in silence watching the sunset spill across those mirror-polished walls. The pain didn't strike like a single blow. It arrived as a series of small, persistent tremors, beginning with his habit of dodging cameras, the times he slipped out of group selfies, the bland explanations about discretion and self-respect. Threads now braided into a taut cord tightening around her wrists, dragging her to stand and watch the man she thought was hers revealed as a safe version carefully staged for everyone here. She remembered the little details. How Andre always chose the table near a wall so his back never faced the door. How he checked the parking lot security cameras whenever night fell. How he left no trace online beyond a few anodyne lines. Those had once made him seem intriguing, different, secretive. Now they turned into incriminating proofs, exposing a stubborn will to run, as if an invisible eye were watching him from far away, an eye he believed would seize on the slightest slip and swallow everything he had built at Fairmont Crest. Bill entered the story like a man carrying out justice, reeking of jealousy he hadn't quite managed to hide. He spoke the name of justice in the language of control, certain that Dani needed a safe shoulder more than a storm that couldn't be measured. His investigation began with a hired detective, but Andre's records refused to line up. A fake address on the outskirts of Atlanta that flashed into a public database and vanished again within 2 weeks. An extended period of unemployment without a trace of taxes or pay stubs, and most troubling of all, a marriage certificate that existed in a city hall extract 2 years ago, but was then pulled from the system as if it had never been there. Bill, long familiar with a world of valid documents and red seals, recognized a hand that understood how to work the machinery of digital files, how to scrub away trails while leaving just enough gaps to sow suspicion. Helplessness began to replace his early rush of triumph. He realized this game wasn't only about peeling a man out of a disguise but about touching a concealment mechanism with its own rules, a discipline of darkness that Andre was clinging to just to breathe. Late at night, alone in his office surrounded by gray background reports, the smell of ink and a cold lamp, he wondered whether he was seeking justice or hunting for an excuse to prove Dani was wrong to trust a man like Andre. Each time the memory of Andre leaning toward Dani slid across his mind, a hot, prickling flush ran along his spine, and he knew his motives weren't pure. A loyal urge to protect the woman he cared for collided head-on with a man's bruised pride that couldn't bear to watch a rival reach for something he had no right to claim. Andre, meanwhile, stood before Fairmont Crest's mirrored walls and found that his reflection was no longer a face but a collage of clashing convictions. He had always believed caution did not equal cowardice, that protecting your family with silence was a quiet kind of courage that needed no applause. He dodged lenses because he wouldn't let his face fall into recognition algorithms that could trace the dust of data back to enemies with resources. He avoided social media because every casual photo was a coordinate, every throwaway comment a timestamp, every thoughtless like a branching path someone could exploit to scaffold a map of his habits. But that logic, armor for so long, turned into shackles when the woman appeared, carrying a child whose eyes he could not deny. There was no ground left for justification, no space for a philosophy of caution in the face of hazy threats. The truth stood there in her exhausted posture, in the fist clutching his sleeve, in the quick breaths of a child too young to grasp what was happening yet attuned to the compressed air of adult tension. Andre found himself driven back against the wall, and for the first time since he'd entered this community, fear came not from the unseen world out there but from the eyes right in front of him. People who used to greet him at the club now watching him like a slow-motion crash about to blow, eager to stand close enough to witness but not close enough to get dust on their shoes. Dani didn't scream, didn't collapse, didn't do anything she might regret later. She withdrew quietly, like closing a door to keep out the draft. But the wind still slid through the cracks. Her anger didn't flare. It smoldered, chewing away at each reason she'd once used to defend him. She replayed small scenes. A phone that never rang after 10 at night because of early bedtime. A text that never ran longer than 2 sentences because he hated oversharing. A stingy way with words erected into a personal virtue. Now everything turned its back on him to testify. Yet between compassion and humiliation lay a gray zone that suffocated her. If what Andre was hiding truly was meant to protect someone from a larger threat, was she punishing an act born of a twisted love? Or was she just searching for a way to forgive him to save the illusion of herself? That she hadn't been duped? That she could see through people? Fairmont Crest teaches people how to decide with cool faces. It doesn't teach anyone how to live with the feeling of being the last to know. Dani left the community center, walked down a corridor lined with photos of charity events Andre always avoided, and realized not only his life but hers was being rearranged. Like an album whose pages someone else had silently resequenced. Rumors flickered through cocktail parties like a fine current, each retelling adding another drop of acid. Some said Andre had changed his name to evade a suspended sentence. Others swore they'd seen him with unfamiliar faces near the marina at dawn. Still others claimed the missing marriage record was the work of a city hall clerk paid handsomely to hit delete. Bill collected gossip like shards of glass, knowing the more he gathered, the likelier he was to cut his hands, and still he couldn't stop. One night, reviewing his office parking lot footage, he caught sight of a dark SUV idling 2 blocks from the gate. No front plate, windows reflecting the streetlights, sitting there 40 minutes before sliding away. The next day, the detective reported a large cash deposit into Andre's account months earlier at a suburban branch. No transaction images because of a technical malfunction that same day. Blind spots piled up, as if someone were always one step ahead, killing off alarms and leaving behind delicate absences that sent Bill's every attempt at assembly into dead ends. He began to grasp that he was no longer the hunter but the mouse being led through a maze designed by another mind. In the dark of this story, a hand remained unseen. It lived in the way the marriage file vanished without a login trail, in the way old social pages tied to Andre's former name were scrubbed, in the way a few of his former acquaintances suddenly stopped picking up when the detective called. The chill of memory strobed at the base of Andre's skull. Nights of driving without headlights over a bridge at the city limits, rushed exchanges at a rickety plastic table behind a 24/7 diner, reminders to change numbers on a schedule, rules that if a silver sedan followed for more than 3 turns, he should divert into a crowded mall and walk out the opposite door. He had once believed leaving the old city meant escape, that changing his name reset his luck, that Fairmont Crest, with its etiquette and fundraising luncheons, could be a cloak to cover every trace. But the people who erase traces also hold the sharpest knives of accusation. They may have ushered him through the door, but the bill could be presented whenever they wished. The woman with the child wasn't only the past. She could be the messenger that his period of silence had expired, that someone wanted him back on the line, or at least wanted him reminded who decided whether he'd be left in peace. Dani heard a scrap of information from the city hall receptionist. The marriage registry had been re-synced on the night of last month's storm, a rare glitch that made certain files disappear and then reappear somewhere else in the temporary database. It sounded harmless, but to someone who'd worked with data, it was a bad alibi. Systems do not surgically cut sensitive items without a command. Storms do not selectively erase crucial fragments tied to one person. Quietly, she traced the chain of version changes, borrowed a login from a librarian she knew, and found a lone footprint. A session originating from an IP tied to the maintenance vendor for Fairmont Crest's own server cluster. The link popped her protected bubble like a pin. Perhaps the people controlling the narrative weren't far away at all, but right inside the community. Perhaps generous donations paired with service contracts had bought not just press silence but also the compliance of public data systems. Dani felt her anger surge, Not only at Andre but at the power structure that made people like her so easy to lead around. But the anger wasn't liberating. It merely sharpened her solitude. If she spoke up, she'd be dismissed as a jilted woman peddling conspiracy. If she stayed quiet, she'd be complicit in a web of manipulation settling over her life. Bill decided to confront Andre within Fairmont Crest's rules, which meant no scenes at the gate, no blaring sirens, only a nameless appointment in the Rose Garden where unpleasant negotiations usually played out like a ritual. He believed direct pressure would crack Andre, that a runner always flinched when truth crowded in from every side. But Andre didn't break the way Bill predicted. He froze, tightened every small muscle in his face, hiding all reaction in the space between two breaths like someone trained to do so. Only one thing slipped. A too-quick blink when Bill mentioned the resync at City Hall. A tell that Andre knew more than he would admit. Bill left the roses with a practical kind of unease, the sort you feel after touching a live wire and not getting shocked yet, which means the current is still on, which means a hand on the switch hasn't needed to press it. At his car, he noticed a smear on the windshield like a fingerprint. To anyone else it was nothing. To him it was a reminder that someone had been close. Close enough to brush away just enough dust for him to see. That night, Dani didn't sleep. She opened the rare photos where Andre had been caught from behind, in the moments he hadn't dodged the frame. They were all pieces she once found endearing. Now they mapped his lies. Yet amid the tangle, she couldn't deny the memories of him shading her from fierce sun in the parking lot, of him cooking simple breakfasts, of a sparing language that could sometimes be a kind of warmth. She hated herself for the compassion that arrived exactly when anger needed air. She hated being a harbor for a man who might have committed some unnamed crime elsewhere. She even hated Bill for a rigid protectiveness that treated her like someone fragile who needed shielding, when what she needed was the truth, however merciless. She thought of the child with Andre's eyes and understood her choices would reach beyond a romance into the way she saw the world. Would she stand with the manicured image this community adored, or with the dark corners where people survive by making ugly but honest decisions? At the edge of Fairmont Crest, the marina slept under a heavy veil, security cameras panning like tireless eyes. A newly hired maintenance tech arrived to check the fiber lines, neutral face, precise motions, a name badge with a misspelling. No one noticed him pull a spare cable, thread it through a junction box, and tuck a device the size of a candy into a narrow seam. That night, the East Side camera zone glitched for 18 minutes. By morning, Bill received an anonymous email. 2 photos of him in the Rose Garden and the parking lot. A wordless note appended. 2 camera angles, a few minutes apart. Proof that someone wasn't only watching Andre but sweeping everyone who touched the story. Bill understood the balance of danger had shifted. He was no longer the investigator safely cloaked by reports. He had stepped into the line of sight. He thought of Dani, of his determination to stage himself as her champion, and for the first time had to consider that pushing things to the limit might turn the woman he wanted to protect into bait. Andre reached the marina before dawn. He called no one, left no message, brought a small bag with an old phone, a few creased photos, and a key to a local bank's safe deposit box he kept like a talisman. He knew eyes were on him. He believed initiative might buy him leverage. If he had to negotiate with the dark, he wanted to do it where he could control the sightlines. But when he powered up the old phone, a string of system texts burst awake. Authentication codes from a cloud storage service he thought he had killed. Someone had restored the account using details only people very close to his former life would have. A cold shiver ran across his back despite the still air. Fear was no longer abstract. The dark had reached the live nerve, had reclaimed keys to the photo vault, the call history, the half-forgotten notes. He looked down at the water, watched his face splinter into fragments, and wondered who would pick up each shard and to what end it be by the time the sun peeled back the fog. Dani was in her car out front, hands locked on the wheel like pinning down an unspoken oath. She knew she had to decide, not whether to forgive or punish, but whether she would allow an unseen network to keep writing her life. She could call the press, drag the IP connection into the light, brand herself a troublemaker in a community that prizes tranquil facades. Or she could leave quietly, carrying the bitter lesson that trust is not a currency to spend in a place where everyone wears a mask. Each choice was its own form of self-destruction. Stay and fight, and she'd lose the last of her gentleness. Go and save herself, and she'd concede another win to the manipulators. She closed her eyes and saw the child with Andre's eyes, felt Bill's look settle on her like armor 2 sizes too big, saw her own reflection in the fogged glass by the docks. She opened her eyes, started the engine, and drove east, toward the hardening light, where everything is clearer and more exposed. At the community center, the board met behind closed doors and released a soft statement about a data incident and a reminder about privacy. A circular way to tell everyone to stop speculating out loud while continuing to whisper over afternoon tea. Bill's phone rang from an unknown number. An even voice recited the name of a city where Andre had vanished for 43 days before reappearing, then gave the address of a post office that might still have camera footage of his car at 3 a.m. He weighed leaving immediately, but he also knew every move was under watch. Urgency is a gift to those who want to herd a man into a trap. He set the phone down, opened a drawer, and looked at a handgun he had never wanted to use, feeling a dense silence settle over the room. For the first time, he couldn't be sure whether pushing forward was about justice or a power-drunken buzz camouflaged as jealousy. In the small desk mirror, his eyes stared back, not judging, only cold. Andre stood at the edge of the wooden pier, fingers on the safe deposit key, debating whether to open it today or wait for another sign. Whatever was inside, he could no longer trust it. Proof that might save him or kindling to torch the rest of his life. In the other pocket lay a thin envelope with Dani's name scrawled in the corner. Something he had once meant to give her. A door into what he'd kept hidden, and every time he reached the threshold, he stepped back. Protection by silence had been a philosophy. Now it was a sin. The survival formula that had saved him had become the wall that blocked him. At Fairmont Crest, where everything has a price, the only thing not tagged is trust. And when it breaks, people pay with exactly what they'd hoped to protect. He dropped the key back into his bag, turned from the water, drew in a long breath as if to swallow the cold salt of morning, and walked. Unsure whether he was moving toward an ending or a beginning. The story doesn't close on an apology or a verdict. It stops at a ledge where 3 people glimpse the worst versions of themselves. Dani sees a heart that wants to believe but fears becoming a tool in a power game. Bill sees a protector more easily provoked by a pride wound than stirred by principle. Andre sees a man so ruled by the codes of the dark he's forgotten how to stand in the light without trembling. At Fairmont Crest, the mirrored walls still gleam. The parties still go on. Heavy pours and music just loud enough to drown the sighs. But in the corners, hidden eyes keep blinking, cables hum, and records can be re-synced at any time. Once truth has cracked and poured out like water, the question is no longer who lied, but who can live with the aftermath without falling apart. Which way Dani turns when the next morning arrives. Which number Bill dials when the 3rd ring sounds. Which box Andre opens in which branch at what hour, and with who at his back. Each is a small decision, each another blade cutting new lines into a canvas already scored. And once the blade has touched, the rest of their lives will be about learning how to staunch the bleeding, in silence. Most importantly, is Fairmont Crest truly a place to revive, or is it the perfect trap to devour those who try to escape the past? If Bill confronts Andre directly, will he be able to control the consequences? Or will he inadvertently set off a chain of hatred that cannot be stopped? Will he himself be in danger? When the truth comes out, will Dani be able to distinguish between the pain of a betrayed person and the compassion for a broken person? If Andre has committed serious sins in the past, will Dani dare to face them and make amends with him?